Hi there, it's Suze here, and today I thought I'd show you how I made this pretty little vintagey style card using some vintage fabrics, threads and some little fabric roses. So start off by taking a piece of curtain lining just as my backing, just so that I can use a hoop, because that's how I prefer to work this project. And the lining actually is from the curtain. This is old, very old curtain material. And the lining is from this particular curtain, so it's really nice to be able to use lots of different bits and pieces together. And then I've got this vintage floral fabric. I've got this piece of lace, also vintage, and then I've got this just a piece of hessian from my stash and 3 fabric roses. And so I've pinned the fabrics onto the backing fabric, and the first thing I'm going to do is take the one of the green threads. This is an olive thread, and I'm going to work around in a single thread, which I've already got ready and knotted up. Pop my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing, and all I'm going to do at this stage is go around and create the border. And I'm going to do that starting at the side and using probably about just under 1 centimetre in from the edge, and I'm going to be using a stem stitch. And the way that I do my stem stitches is I come up, I go forward, I kind of keep the needle in the line that I'm working in, so I go forward and then I come back up halfway, and I keep the thread on the outside of the project all the way around. And it's a quick and simple way of creating a nice little frame, and it also secures all the fabrics to the backing fabric. You don't want to make the stitches too big, but so that I can work quickly, I'm probably making them a little bigger than I normally would. I'm coming up just at the end of where I went down. So I'm going down here, coming up where I went down previously. Not too formal. If I'm slightly out, it doesn't matter. And I'll take you round the first 2 corners, and then what I'll do is I'll just finish off camera so that it doesn't take too long. But it's a nice relaxed stitch, this. It's almost like an upside down back stitch. Now when I get to the corner, I want my corner to be about here. So I'm going to do 1 more stitch and come up. Now if I were carrying on straight up the fabric, my next stitch would be here, but I'm going to go around the corner. So I'm coming over here, thinking about the line I want to take across the fabric, and then I shall come up at the point where I last went down, and the thread again is to the outside. Now here I actually do a little securing stitch, because if I didn't, then when I go ahead here, ahead to the other side, this would come across to the middle. So in order to stop that loop across there, I'll just do a little securing stitch and then come up halfway through the previous stitch and just keep working my way forward. And I'll show you just once more, coming to the end on the top. So forward and back, keeping that thread down on the outside of the project. And I've just going to remove that because that's getting in the way. And I've unthreaded my needle. So I'm just going to rethread my needle. Glad that worked. Could have been here all day otherwise. Carrying on working my way across. I have also done this project with double thread, but the single thread is a lot easier because you don't have to worry about the tensions of the two threads and loops, and it's a lot less likely to catch behind the fabric as well. So I'm coming up to that second corner now. Couple more stitches. So this is going to be my corner stitch here. And again, instead of carrying on in a straight line, I'm going to work out where my line of stitching is going to be here, coming to the next corner. So down there, up at the previous stitch, thread on the outside, and then, as mentioned before, I'm going to do that little securing stitch to keep that nice neat corner before coming back halfway through and then continuing forward and back, forward and back. I might as well carry on now because I've almost finished this thread. As you can see, it's quite quick, and you can always fast forward if you've seen enough this bit. I'm only going to do a couple more stitches because when your thread gets to this length, you know what's going to happen. It's just going to come undone, just going to come out of the needle, and that just takes you more time than if you just stopped where it's easier and rethreaded. So I'm going to come down here and turn over, finish off at the back. And the way that I like to finish off is I just do a little loop, create a little loop of thread, and I go through it and do another one, create a little loop and go through it, pull the thread, snip that off, and that's that done. As you can see what I mean, it's kind of like a back stitch, and I've got very uneven stitches. I really don't mind as long as I've got a nice border. So I'm going to come back to you when I've finished doing the stem stitch all the way around. When I start again, I shall just come up halfway from the last stitch and continue again. So I'll see you back in a moment. Okay, so I'm almost finished working my way around to do the frame, and I thought I would just show you how I finish off. So I've come down to this point here because I've just worked out that that's where I need my last stitch to be. So I've come up halfway through. My next stitch is going to continue along this line, ready to join it. So going down, come up at the corner, do that little securing stitch on the corner, and then to continue the stem stitch, coming up halfway through, and then I'll work forward again. And I've just got a couple more stitches to do, and then I'll finish this section. And down, and that's really nicely matched up. turn it round, finish off as I did before with a little loop at the back. There's my loop. One more. And that's that nice and secured. And I'll keep this thread for when I go back around and do the leaves in a little while. But my next step is across the lace. I just want to secure that lace down. I don't need any more pins because it's caught in at the edges. And for this I'm just going to do a very simple running stitch. So to knot my thread I just wrap it round my finger. This is how I do it. Again, we've all got our own ways, haven't we? And I roll it up and then I use my nail to just pull down and then I trim off. I've ended up with a little loop there, which I don't normally do, but that's fine. I'm going to trim that off. Just give it a little tug, make sure it's not going to come out. And I'm going to start here. I'm going to, when I finish this project, I'm probably going to just trim the lace off. It's about right there. And then I'll trim this side off to match. So I'm actually going to start my running stitch around about there. And I'll go up and down. In fact, I'm going to take this out of the hoop for this, because it's just easier to do that rocking motion. Pop that out. I've got a slightly longer needle for this as well, so that I can do a few more stitches. Thread's a little bit long as well. I shouldn't really use threads that are this long because the tendency is for them to get tangled then. But for this project, because I don't want to keep having to rethread my needle, I've gone a bit longer. A bit naughty really. And just make sure that you get your tension on that. If it's puckering a little bit, just pull it back out. Really quick. Up and down. I want to go under the green thread, I don't want to go over it, because this is kind of invisible, because the colour matches the lace so well. Can't really see it. And then I don't want to go beyond this because I'm going to trim that down. So I'm going to go down there, and you can pop a couple of little stitches on the edge if you want to here. Don't really need to, but it's a neat way of carrying the thread across. Pull that through the back. Make sure the tension's okay there. Come back up here, and then I'll probably just have one stitch before the frame. And you can see I haven't been particularly neat with my stem stitch. It was really just to get that frame down, because I'm going to be neatening it up with leaves and popping lots of little mini roses on it as well. So once it's all done, it'll look lovely. Underneath the frame, last stitch down, turn it over, that's all okay there, and finish off. One loop. I need to stab myself then. 2 loops and snip that off. Okay, so we've got the backing fabric down, we've got the lace down, and what I'm going to do now is work around doing the lazy daisies. Well, they're actually detached chain stitches. So I'm using a double thread for this, shall I? No, I'm going to use a single thread. Use a single thread because that's what I've done on the frame, and it keeps it really very, almost a very delicate, fragile looking design then. And I think I'll pop this back in the frame. So I've got my frame, and I always tend to put ribbon around the lower part. I find it helps to grip this a bit more. So, and if I find it's easier to take it out of the frame, it only takes a second, doesn't it? Secure that in. Haven't left it tight, because then I do still have a little bit of room to rock the needle when I do my detached chain stitches. I'm going to start on this side because I'm right-handed. I'm going to work my way around that way, and I'm going to come up first of all at this corner, and I pretty much work on the frame to do my detached chain stitches. I come up and go down at almost the same point, rock the fabric, and then the needle comes out at the length that I want my leaf to be. And then I need to make sure that my thread goes underneath the needle. I pull that out in the direction that I want the leaf to go, and then when I've got that, the length that I want it to be, I will then pop that little securing stitch down at the end. And then when I do as I work my way up, I alternate up and down. So again, rocking, what am I doing? The other way. Just turned it around and it confused me. Go down, come up at the length that I want the leaf to be. Go under the thread, pull it in the direction that I want the leaf to go, and then do a little securing stitch. And for some reason, I find it easier to work towards me when I'm doing these. No, I don't. I'm going to work away from me. Oh, there we go. So, what length do I want this? About the length of the grain of rice. And again, it's a very informal pattern, so you can just vary them. Some longer, some shorter. Entirely up to you. Go down almost, but not exactly at the point that I came up. Rock my needle up. Make sure the thread is underneath the needle. Pull it in that direction that I want the leaf to travel in. And pop that down. I'll do a couple more, and then I'll stop recording and I'll come back to you when I've finished. So up there, down, rock the needle, and just make sure you can see where the needle's coming up. That looks about right. I've got the thread underneath already, so I just pull that there and secure that. Two more and then I'll stop. I really like this stitch. And you can get quite a full look by having more threads. And the other thing that you could do is you could just do a single straight stitch in the middle of your leaf if you wanted to fill it out a little bit more, or give it the kind of appearance of a vein on the leaf. So down almost at the same point. You can actually capture the frame as well, that stitch, and then that secures that down as well. And then work out how long I want that stitch to be. That's fine. Pull the thread in that direction and secure that down. I've twisted the thread there so it's gone really skinny, but I'm not too worried about that. That's why you want to try and make sure that when you do your loop goes in the direction that your thread's gone, and then you get a better loop shape. You can just come up any way you like. You don't have to do the rocking it. You can just stab stitch if you want to, but that's the habit that I got into. And you can also just travel straight across if you wanted to, but I like to go down. One more stitch, and then I'm going to replace the threads. So I've gone up, and again got confused about the direction. Go down almost in the same place. I want it to come up around about here. Put it in that direction. Nice little shape. Pop a securing stitch down. And I think I can get away with one more, just one more stitch. It's funny how we hate wasting our threads, don't we? Okay, down almost the same point. Up where I want this leaf to end. Thread goes round the back. Pull that through. Secure that down, and that is it. And I'll come back to you when I've finished. Okay, I've finished working my way around doing the frame, and I've actually just continued going in one direction. If you wanted to, you could do it slightly differently. You could work up and on both sides and just across at the top. But just for ease, I just went round in one direction. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round and start doing my French knots. So I'll show you how I do those. And what I tend to do with those is kind of do them in between the leaves. And I come up, I've got a double thread of the pink. It's a dusky pink, it's a lovely colour, this one. Pomegranate, this one, really nice. Again, a very old thread. And actually, as I'm working on off the top layer, you can see it's revealing a slightly darker dusky pink underneath, which is even nicer. So I'm guessing the top layer might be a little bit dusty. So the way that I do my French knots is I come up with my double strand. Now you can vary the size and shape of your French knots depending on how many strands of thread you use, especially if you're using embroidery threads. Obviously if you use 6 strands, you're going to get a much bigger French knot than if you only use 1. And the other way you can vary the size is depending on the number of wraps you do around the needle. Because I'm using this very thin, really it's a sewing thread rather than embroidery thread, I'm going to do 3 wraps around it. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to go back in just a little bit to the right of where I came up. If I show you that, that's where I came up. And I'll show you again because I unwrapped it. And I 1, 2, 3, wrapping towards me, down just to the right. And then what I do is I just gently pull on the thread until it actually goes right down to the fabric. And then I'm holding the thread here and I'm pulling through. And my needle is a pretty straight needle. It hasn't got a great big eye. So that makes it easier to go through. And then I'm just going to work my way along, doing lots of these little French knots. So I come up, wrap 1, 2, 3, down just to the other side of that where I came up, gently pull until I've got a nice loose wrap of threads around the needle, holding the thread until the last minute and then let go. I'll do a couple more of those and then I'll work my way around and come back to you. So up, 1, 2, 3, down just to the outside of that where I came up, gently pull on the thread till it goes right down to the fabric, and then I'm holding the thread with my thumb and that pulls through really beautifully. The trick to this is to just take your time and get your tension right. Gently pull, and also it's about having a needle that's you know, got a nice shape to it, not too thick at one end. And the last one I'll do, then I'll need to change the thread, so I'll come back to you when I've finished. And just untangle that. 1, 2, 3, down next to it, pull gently on the thread until it hits the fabric, pull through and secure. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to finish off at the back, just doing my little loop through the loop, one more, down, up, through the loop and pull. And I'll come back when I've gone all the way around. I've finished my stitches all the way around, my little French knots, as you can see. So that's the frame finished, and the next part is to stitch down this little bit of hessian, and I've trimmed it down. I've actually frayed it a little bit as well, so it's just about the right size now, and I want that just sort of coming down into my lace, and I'm just going to stitch that down. So here's the original. So I kind of have the roses in a group just about here, so I might bring that down a little bit more. I can always put the roses, let's get the roses and see where to pop those. It's always good to offer these up onto your fabric and work out where you want things. And see if I want to trim that hessian down a little bit. I think I might just trim it down so it's a bit more of a diamond shape. So I'm only going to trim that much off because I still need to fray it, and if I'm not careful I'll end up with nothing, just threads. Okay. And I had a thread, needle and thread, and I've just dropped it on the floor. So I'm going to thread up another needle, and that's with this colour, which is the sort of, it's more of a burlap colour. Just take a bit of that, and again it'll be single thread, and I must remember to find the other one. Oh, dropped glasses. I just realised I had 2 pairs of glasses on my head. So I've been walking around with one on my head while I was wearing one. And then obviously at some point I've pulled the other pair onto my head as well. And yeah, great. I'm going to use a single thread, so I'm just going to knot one end. And again, I pop it over, roll it, and that's how I knot my threads. And I'm going to pop a little pin into that just to hold that down while I stitch it in place. And I think I'll take this out. Take this out of the hoop because I'm going to do a running stitch, and it's just because it's such a small space, a small area that I'll be stitching, it will be much quicker if I can just rock my needle backwards and forwards. And I'm going to come in around about here, just a couple of threads in from where I've frayed. And if I was worried about the fabric fraying anymore, then what I could do is actually go back along that same pathway, or do sort of diagonal stitches. So I'm going to actually stitch that into the corner there to hold that bit in place, so that I don't lose that thread. And I'm going to come back along actually no, I'm going to work my way around first, and then I'll go back and work my way around again. So just a running stitch. This time I'm on the outside thread rather than coming in a bit more. I'll get that down first and then I'll go back in and do another row of stitches just to make sure that's all nice and secure. And I'm just making sure that my thread doesn't get caught up in the edges of those frayed strands. You can see how easy it would be to just lose the whole piece of material when it's such an open weave. And I'm going to just loop that around my finger so I can keep control of that. And again, I'm going to come into the corner here and actually stitch that last thread down. And that way I know it's not going to just escape. Like that one has. Oh no, that's my thread. There we are. And then I come down the next line of fabric, turn that round so I can do my running stitch. Again, I'm working on this row, it's almost the last row. And occasionally maybe capture the top thread as well, just so that's nice and secure. Take that last pin out. Otherwise that's just going to fall off, isn't it? And then back down. Capture that last thread on the other end. And because I can see that this thread here is loose, I'm actually going to put a little stitch over that as well. Diagonally into that corner like I did on the last one. And I'm going to come down. See that this is coming out, so I'm pushing that back in. So I'll do a running stitch coming down here. And then I'll come up and capture that top thread that's very loose. Capture that. So you have to be a little bit careful, but it doesn't take too long because it's such a small piece. Back to my line of running stitches, and then I'll come up and capture that end in a second. And into the corner. That's how I've captured the end. I've just gone up with the running stitch. And now I'll come back down. And I have already done a row of stitches here, but I'm actually just going to do a couple of zigzag stitches just to secure some of that top line. And you'll never know because the thread's almost invisible. So I'll go down after a couple, come up a bit further down. I could do a little zigzag over there. It's a bit too far over there. Just a few little random stitches just to stop these threads getting too loose. And then there's no chance that these are going to just fall off. Release that thread because It's just pulling the line out. And do another one or two along here. Doesn't take long really. By going diagonally across, I'm just working my way along a bit more quickly. But you can do it any way you want to. Straight stitches, diagonal stitches, whatever works for you. I think it kind of works in with this whole rough look. And this one I did right along the edge, with capturing a couple of the outside ones, so I can come in a bit and do a running stitch along here, because the outside ones have been captured a bit already. And I think that's enough. That'll do me. Happy with that. So I'll finish off at the back with my little loops. One more. Snip that off. Size of these scissors, ridiculous. Okay, so that's the next section done. And all that's left to do is to add my roses now. Now I'm going to put this back on the hoop, which is very easy to do. Let's pop that underneath. Pop that down over the top and secure this at the top of where I'll be working. Now when I do the roses, I come back to my green thread and I have it single again. Wrap that around, roll it and pull the knot down. Trim off the end. We'll do another one just in case. Hold it just above the previous knot and it should. Okay, now we're going to work on the roses, and I've got the work back in the embroidery hoop again, and I find that the leaves are quite long on these roses, and hopefully you'll see from here that what I do is I actually put a stitch in at the back to make them a bit smaller so that they are a bit more in keeping with the size of the rose. And the way that I do that is I've knotted my thread already, and I'm going to come up just on one side because it's a double, and then I'm going to go through the ribbon, and that shortens that leaf, and I just do one round a loop to secure that one, and then I do the same on the other side. I'm taking the top near the outer edge of the leaf, and I'm stitching through, get there in the end, stitching through the back of the rose. I'm stabbing myself at the same time. Right, so pull that through. It looks a bit messy, but it'll be hidden. And then the rose, when it's stitched down, you've got a much more subtle leaf. Okay, so I'm going to just start stitching that, but before I do, I just want to work out where I want to put the roses, and I think I'm just going to do the same sort of thing, just have them in a little bundle. So I'll do that one at the top. I think it was about there. already got the thread in the rose, so I'm just going to stitch through the rose again and down into the fabric. And then I'll just do a couple more stitches just to secure that into the fabric. Hold that in place. I could do double thread if I wanted to, but and we'll just get a little bit of these leaves showing then. It's a bit fiddly this bit because the leaves, the roses are a little bit bulky, but it'll be fine. Come up through the leaf and I'll go back down through the rose, and that way I know that's nice and secure on the work. And that's facing upwards, that one. And I'm going to come up and do the same on here. Through there. Now let's see if I can just thread it on like this. A bit of a shortcut without doing all the stitches at the back. I think that'll be fine. But if you prefer to just stitch your roses individually, then do that if that's less fiddly for you. No exact science for this because so they are quite fiddly. And I think that one will go about there. So just keep making sure that you're happy with the positioning. Come up underneath now, and stitch down through the leaf and through the rose. A lot of bulk there. Twisting my needle really just so that I pull through okay. But once you've put a couple of stitches in, this isn't going anywhere. This is very secure. Now I'm going to come up and do the last one. You could probably finish off and make it easier for yourself rather than doing what I'm doing and trying to do it all at once. Just my nature. Why make it easy for yourself when you can make it much more complicated? I mean, worst case scenario, if it didn't work or I didn't like it, I'd just trim off the threads at the back and start again. So I've got that on. I'm going to kind of tuck that into place. And stitch down. And when I stitch down, that bottom leaf will be shortened. Just like that. And then I'll just do again a few more securing stitches. Through the leaf, through the rose. And I'm going to actually push that up a little bit more and do another stitch at the bottom. And that will pull that nicely into shape down there. Another stitch just under here. So just go, but have a little look and have a little pull, see if there's any movement. I'm going back down into the rose, into the fabric, and that will really hold that in place nicely. And then if you want to do any adjustment, now's the time, because you can use the odd stitch here and there just to move things around, but I think I'm pretty happy with that. A little bit of that showing, a little bit of that green showing. And yes, I'm pretty much done, I think. I'll do one more stitch, and I could actually come up through that leaf and almost pin that down, and that will be my final stitch. And there we have it. I'll finish off at the back. And I'm sure a lot of you will have a far more sophisticated way of attaching those, but I've done this several times now and it's worked for me. But as I say, you probably find it easier if you just stitch your leaves onto the back of your roses and then just attach them directly once you've shortened the leaves, but I can't help trying to take shortcuts. Okay, so there's my project done. All that's left now is, and I've worked it slightly bigger, but I'm just going to show you what I do to finish off. I'm going to take this out of the hoop. Excuse me. And I'm now going to trim down the fabric, and what I want to do is actually going to work on the back. See, I may not have followed the exact grain of the thread, so I want to make sure that if I cut here, I would end up tearing it and it would come through the stitches, so I'm going to make sure that I don't do that. Tear here, and I can always fray this off, you see. Oh, I know I've got a little bit more leeway, but and I'm holding my stitching down, and again here. Love tearing fabric, absolutely love it. And I've got quite a little bit of leeway, so I'm going to trim another little piece off this. Same on this side. Holding my stitches so that they don't get damaged. And just gently work your way around until you've got the shape you want. And I know I can come up quite a bit here. Now, that's way too big to go on a card, but it would make a lovely project to go on the front of a book. However, I am doing cards, so I am going to trim the whole thing down, actually. That would have been easier to start with, wouldn't it? Just trim the whole thing down. Instead of doing all that ripping and tearing that I just so enjoy. And the reason I'm not tearing this is because this fabric has got this funny pattern to it, which means that it doesn't tear, only tears a little bit across one side. So I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to just use my scissors to fray the edges of it. And that is a much better size from a card, but I still want to trim a bit more off. So I'm going to go just a little bit more. And again, this is where you make sure that you cut your fabric down to the size of whatever project you're doing. And so before you start your project, know what you're making, and make sure that particularly your middle elements are the right size, so that you still have a little bit of this as a frame. Because I can now put this on a card of the same size and it would be absolutely fine. Though I am going to stitch a little, trim a little bit more. And I think that's a bit more balanced, and that, to me, that's the right size. Could always stamp happy birthday or something underneath, entirely up to you. Now this is just sort of trial and error, this bit, isn't it? And then I use my scissors just to fray some of those edges, just to soften those out. And don't forget you've got the other fabric underneath, so that might show through, which is quite nice. Or it might not. Once you've frayed this fabric a little bit, this is what I mean about the fabric. The way it's, the pattern in it holds its shape, so you can't just, like with this, you can just pull these out and you've got sort of a fair bit of control, because you know you've got a straight line here that you'll fray to, and each time you pull a thread you're moving down a whole line. But with this fabric, when you pull a thread, it only goes so far. So, and it also works better in one direction than the other because of the grain of the thread. So just pull a few threads out till you're happy with it. And then once you've got the look that you like, you've got any threads at the back, you can trim those off as well. They usually pull up quite easily, these ones. If not, you can trim those off. Trim off any threads that are too messy for you, and there you have your finished piece. And all you would need to do is pop a bit of glue. I sometimes actually stick a piece of card. I cut a piece of card down to the size of where my outer stitching is, and glue it, and try to avoid the outside area where the glue might show through. But you know here you've got plenty of layers, so if you pop a bit of glue on here, stick a bit of card on it, and then glue the card to this card, then you've got a nice strong element to stick to the front of your card. So there we are, all done. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you'll come back and join me another time. I've got a couple more projects to do like this. I have the kits available on my Facebook page. My Facebook page, if you're interested, is Suze Humphreys Designs. So if you're interested in the kits with the vintage fabrics and vintage threads, drop me a message on my Facebook page, Suze Humphreys Designs, and I'll let you know if any kits are still available and how much they are. So thank you for joining me, and have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you back here soon. Bye.